Welcome back to my channel, guys. Today we're going to be going over the top ships used in Azur Lane for PvP, aka exercises. We are going to be looking at data from the year of 2021, so this is not the most current season, but it is the seasons that occurred in 2021. Of course, this is data that I have collected with the help of my data collectors. Thank you so much. If you guys don't know, this channel actually started looking at just PvP. In 2019, I started collecting PvP data in the Washington server. Mid-2020, I got some data collectors that helped me, and we collected for all English servers. So data today is going to take a look at all English servers: Washington, Aurora, Lexington, Sandy, and even Amagi. Note that the data only looks at the usage of ships from people ranked in the top 100 at the end of a PvP season. If you're not ranked in the top 100, your fleets are not going to be considered in this data, nor are any top 100 rankings before the end of the season. So we're just looking at the top players. In theory, we're assuming that they're going to have access to all of these ships at 120 max level, everything, because, you know, if you're ending in the top 100 of a server for PvP, you probably have a pretty good access to different ships in your dock. So the first thing I want to show you is the comparison of two ships over time across the 26 seasons. Here we're going to take a look at Nagato and Vittorio Veneto, two flagship ships for the respective factions. Nagato obviously seeing a lot of play in the early seasons of 2021. And then you can see when Vittorio Veneto releases due to the Italian event, you can see her taking off, and you can see it directly eating into the percent used by Nagato. Nagato players dropped Nagato and switched to Vittorio Veneto. This is really emblematic of the meta shift that occurred in early to mid 2021. Next up, I want to take a look at something similar. It's going to be IJN versus Italian again, but it's going to be a little bit different. We're looking at Shinano here. Shinano at this time was the most popular and most used ship in the game, even more than Nagato, because of the new carrier mechanic, which Shinano got to hide behind the hidden carrier mechanic and then launch one of the most oppressive airstrikes, still one of the most oppressive airstrikes in the game. If Shinano is able to get one of these airstrikes off, you are probably going to win this game, and she was dominant. However, you can see right here when Acula released, everyone started using Acula, and as soon as Acula started getting released, Shinano started getting dropped hard. Shinano is tanky, however, with Acula, you get two airstrikes to reveal completely Shinano, meaning she doesn't get the hidden carrier mechanic from any of the battleships. She doesn't get the extra damage that comes from being hidden, and Acula, if you build her right, will be able to get two airstrikes off before Shinano, and with the right planes like those UR Wyverns and the Tenrai, you can actually see that Shinano might die, not too unrealistically, before she gets an airstrike off, and that is why in the top tables of PvP, you see her basically go down to under 25% usage from being up over 75% usage in even one of the seasons. Acula is actually almost up to that 75% now with all of the new UR planes like the Wyvern and the Tenrai. She really benefits from that because the devs made her a little bit weaker in order to give her a preloaded airstrike. One thing that I thought I would see from the data that I didn't is when I looked at Warspite and Acula. I assumed, because when Acula first came out, before New Jersey came out, Warspite would have been something that people would have used. I actually switched to using Warspite. She allowed me to snipe Shinanos once Acula revealed them. You can see here that Warspite saw a very minor uptick when Acula first came out, but she was pretty quickly dropped. We see a little bump and it went right back down to her normal usage. We don't see really a spike in Warspite usage, even though that Warspite Acula pair for sniping was very viable. I can speak to myself. I won my Admiral of the Navy challenge and got 3rd place with it, so it definitely works. It just wasn't very popular, or as popular as I thought. You do see a little bit of a bump, but not that much. And then when you overlay New Jersey on here, you see why that happened. That small bump came up when Acula first came out, and then New Jersey came out like 2 seasons later, and basically that bump went right back to normal because anyone who was using Warspite to snipe just dropped it straight for New Jersey, and I think that is the right move, and that's actually the reason why we see a very small bump that goes right back down. You can see here New Jersey is just killing it. Over 85%, almost 90% usage in the latest seasons. She is absolutely oppressive. This is like indicative of a tier 0 ship. You can just see right when she comes out, there's a little bit of waiting because people haven't leveled her up yet. And then you just see, boom, just keeps growing and growing. So for the main fleet, this is actually the most popular ship. I'll just spoil it right now because most ships have a very hard time getting over the 75% mark in usage. Most ships actually stay below 50%, but here New Jersey is over 90%. And yeah, it's pretty obvious that she is the most popular used ship in PvP. She also won the popularity poll, and she's also the strongest ship. So let's move on to the Vanguard ships. I actually had you guys do a poll yesterday on my channel to see which ship you thought was the most used ship. Over 2,200 people voted in that poll. Thank you so much. And the overwhelming consensus was that Anchorage would be the most used ship. 39% of you thought that was the case. Other options included Juno, Yukikaze, Abruzzi, and Shimikaze. All are very highly used ships. So let's see which one was the most used. So first off, we'll start off by looking at Yukikaze, the old tier 0 oppressor in PvP Vanguard fight. She literally had backline heals, negate damage, oppressive torpedo damage, an amazing all-around ship. You can see her basically just degrade the whole year from like literally one of the highest use cases, well over 80%, to down where she is now. Still actually viable to see her around, but certainly not as oppressive. She's like under 25% now. Wow, have the mighty fallen. I also put Azuma here because she used to be a pretty popular choice as well. Of course, not as popular as Yukikaze because Azuma was much harder to actually get to dev level 30 and Fate 5, so less people had her. But you can see how she also took a nosedive and dropped under 25% too. This was likely because of the uptake of a gear. I've showed her here. Of course, this is still in 2021, so a lot of people didn't have her ready. So you can even see that, you know, the usage of a gear is a little bit lower, but you do see Azuma's drop off basically once a gear started being used. And a gear is growing, but very slowly. Anyway, let's get back to looking at the top Vanguard ships used in 2021 for PvP. Obviously, we had Yukikaze, but let's see somebody actually beat her. Here we have Shimikaze, who released late into 2021 a UR for the Vanguard destroyer. She has oppressive destroyer torpedo damage, double preloaded, insane. She is actually very popular usage now, but you can even see here right from the bat, she started creeping up. Obviously, it's been a little bit of time since the end of 2021, so that number continues to rise even after this data set ends. But even so, by the end of 2021, she was already outranking Yukikaze in usage. So Yukikaze, sorry, you're no longer the most used Vanguard ship, even though you held that title since basically when she came out. Of course, a little bit after she came out, some of the newer players didn't have her and Juno took that spot. But then when Yukikaze was added to the general build pool and everyone had access to her again, she was definitely going to be the most used ship for a long time. Salute to her, but we must move on. Shimikaze, obviously more popular as a torpedo ship here. And if you were wondering about the torpedo ship's buffers, Noshiru, she has been used less than she used to, but didn't actually see a huge decrease. Shimikaze is still used more than Noshiru, meaning that there are fleets with Shimikaze, but not with Noshiru. But Noshiru basically didn't lose her spot. Yukikaze was losing her spot to Shimikaze. And in case anyone was wondering about Jinsu, because people say that Jinsu can be better in certain situations, she's not really used as much in PvP. Noshiru is the better ship in PvP. Jinsu has her place in PvE, and she also has her place in total, like, all torpedo comps where you need both. You can see, though, that she has decreased as well and is not on par with Noshiru usage. In fact, if you take a look at Naganami, who is a ship solely used in triple torpedo comps, and she matches Jinsu very closely because those are what are used. You have Naganami, Jinsu, and Noshiru for a while. Obviously now Shimikaze takes that slot over Naganami, but before Shimikaze came out, Naganami was pretty much the best slot here. So Shimikaze was the second most popular choice amongst the people who voted in the polls, with thinking who would be used the most in a Vanguard ship for 2021. Number one was Anchorage, though, so let's take a look at Anchorage versus Shimikaze. Anchorage obviously came out before Shimikaze, but Anchorage is a PR ship, so you need to have the Prince and Upgrader, whereas Shimikaze, you basically just get her, and obviously need UR Bolins, but that's pretty easy to acquire. So as predicted, Anchorage actually beats out Shimikaze here. She grew faster, and she's still higher. Both of them are still growing, so they both have higher numbers today than they did at the end of 2021 here. But yes, Anchorage is more popular than Shimikaze pretty much every season in the dataset that I have here. We have 2 ships left to compare, and let's compare against Juno, because Juno is another USS faction ship like Anchorage, and we all know that New Jersey is the most popular ship in the game, not only in the popularity poll, but in usage numbers. And she needs another USS ship. For a while before Anchorage came out, that was actually Seattle. You can see the comparison here. Seattle was actually seeing some usage, not quite over 25%, but actually pretty good for an old PR ship. And then Anchorage came out, and she basically dropped back down to nothing because Anchorage is the better ship. But Juno has always been a decent option, and with the Manju item existing, she doesn't have to worry too much about torpedoes like Shimikaze. Anchorage has obviously got her own defense against Shimikaze with her preloaded smokescreen, but let's see how Juno compares as the US option here. We see that Seattle obviously did not stand up to Anchorage over time, and Juno just barely surpasses Anchorage here. Just barely. Juno obviously has been a staple since basically the beginning of the game. Any PvP guide will have her as an option. Sacrificing Juno is just eternal part of exercising, but she does inch out Anchorage. I'm interested to see if in March 2022, if that's the same, but at the end of 2021, Juno was still being used more than Anchorage in top 100 PvP fleets. You can just see how dominant Juno is, just like the persistence. Right around that 50% mark, even higher when New Jersey came out, because people who were, using torpedo memes actually needed to switch and use at least one USS ship in order to proc New Jersey's skill. So they opted with Juno. But, obviously we saw that Anchorage did see that Juno declined when Anchorage started seeing a little bit more usage, because it's taking kind of that role. So obviously the poll was wrong. Juno was more popular than Anchorage, but we still have one last ship to compare with Juno in order to figure out which one was the most used. And it is a Bruzy. She just barely edges out Juno at the very last few seasons there. She started off being very popular in the Italian fleet when she came out and basically became an instant success. She took over a lot of the Yukikaze bills. This is actually something that you can see. As Italian fleets started being more popular, they needed to actually throw somebody into the Vanguard in order to get Vittorio Veneto's skill off and be able to still use New Jersey. So you can see Duca's rise actually started a little bit when the Italians came out, but it really took off when New Jersey came out, and you actually had to make a Italian Vanguard ship, and she was the #1 choice. She obviously was torpedoes, so she had to take off the torpedo slot. She wasn't part of the defensive slot, so your USS faction got to stay, and she took over that slot, which was typically reserved for Yukikaze. Obviously, when Shimikaze came out, you'd think that she would see a decline, and really you don't see that though. Both ships are actually pretty popular. Now, more recently, we've seen some comps come out that try to move away from Duca and the Italians and just try to stick with maybe the Burger fleet is kind of more common, or the new Weed fleet is actually taking off and doing very well, especially in Asia. But here in the English global servers, at least at the end of 2021, Duca is the most popular Vanguard ship to be used. And that actually really surprised me, because I thought she was kind of niche, but I guess the Italians rule the world. Mamma mia, ima ikuyo. No! Or do they? I actually have comparisons of every ship ever used, and we can categorize them by season, by faction, and we can see which factions are the most popular over time, or at least over 2021. So here we're looking at percentage of ships that belong to a particular faction that are used. And you can see at the beginning of 2021, it was basically all IJN. People were playing mono IJN fleets, and they were playing them in a huge way. The only real reason is Juno. You can see that USS faction was kind of used here. This is really just Juno. I mean, maybe some people were playing something like Enterprise or something like that, but basically that blue line is mostly Juno. And the rest is basically going to be the IJN. The yellow line, which is the HMS, made up effectively Warspite and maybe Perseus. And then you had a bunch of your mono factions. The orange line is basically just Richelieu, because no one uses the French ships except Richelieu. We have our KMS stands over there in the black line, but it's basically just IJN. And then you can see the Italians come out and they make a little bit of jump, and you can start to see the decline of the IJN, but not by a lot. And then New Jersey comes out, and you can see New Jersey come out right when that blue line takes off. You can see that slide of IJN. And this is where I always like to laugh when people talk about like how oppressive the Mafia fleet is. And I mean, it is basically tier 1, tier 0. But remember how oppressive the IJN fleet was for so long? Like, it's only a pretty recent thing that you've seen IJN not be sitting at like that 60 to 75% usage rate. This usage rate of IJN went back for basically all of 2020. I mean, this usage was probably the Shinano Hiru Nagato fleet, but before that happened, we had the Nagato Amagi fleet. Hiru usually was the third choice, but it could also be, you know, you could have something not IJN in that faction, like Warspite. But basically, IJN sat up there. And if you watched any of my old meta-analysis videos, it was just IJN, IJN, IJN. And only in the second half of 2021 did you really see that change. Now, it might be a little bit misleading here to look at it being more defined meta, because the IJN fleet was basically mono IJN with a Juno. Potentially, that was usually what was played, so 5 IJN and a Juno. And the Mafia fleet is usually 3 USS ships and 3 Italian ships split there, and you can see that the Italians and the US are about the same there. So if you're actually trying to compare an IJN fleet to one of those, you should actually add on and add those together, and that should get you around where the IJN is. Of course, it's usually only gonna be a 5/6 because that IJN fleet should be increased a little bit. So I would say Mafia fleet is probably just as or a little bit under as oppressive as IJN was before, but it's certainly not more oppressive. And you can see that here. You can also see that things like Warspite and Perseus started to see decrease in usage. You know, the Ironblend stands have stayed constant over there. Richelieu sees, you know, I mean, I can't really notice too much of a difference here, but this is over time. We can see that comparison. Eagle Union, if you guys were wondering, was the most popular faction. So it is actually more popular than the Italians, and that's because Italians outside of Aquila have to be used kind of together, where something like New Jersey and Juno can be put in anything. And Anchorage. Forget about Anchorage sometimes, but Anchorage, New Jersey, and Juno can be put in any fleet without anything else, and is actually pretty good. Aquila does have that, but not the other two. All right, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this. A little bit of fun stats about usage for PvP. If you guys want to, I'll probably put something in the description where you can go and play around with this yourself if you want to look at different data. Here are the top 30 ships by the last season that I have recorded here. So you can see the usage. They're not broken up by front line and back line, so you just have to kind of do that yourself. But in case you wanted to see that, otherwise, I'll probably have a link where you can play around with it yourself, play around with the little graphs. And I made this video today because I'm going to be live streaming later tonight, and I want as many of you guys to be there to help me decide the new tier list. I made a tier list on GitHub a while ago. I haven't really updated it, and I'm trying to update it. And I want to have your guys' input. Obviously, a tier list for the community needs to have input from the community. So I hope you guys have time tonight to come show up. I want to put this data so you guys have a little bit of time to mull over the data. We'll talk about this data actually on the live stream. And if you can't make it, that's all right. I'll be having a video on my channel about what we decided, like in a concise way, so you don't have to show up and, you know, sit around for hours while we decide and debate on the live stream. We will create an actual guide. That guide will be put on the GitHub, and you'll be able to view it and read it at any time. And I'll also make a video for the channel so that you guys can have like a concise reason about why I chose certain things and where we stand and, you know, stuff like that. Maybe someday we'll actually get to the gear part. I do plan on actually doing that. It's just been pretty busy. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. Thank you guys for coming out. I hope this data helps you guys with, you know, whatever decision making you want to make, or maybe just something interesting. Show up to my Twitch if you can, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.